Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Chatting the Pictures. If you're just joining us for the first time, we are a weekly webcast where we analyze three important news photos of the week. My name is Cara Finnegan. I'm a writer, teacher, and photography historian.
And I'm Michael Shaw, publisher of Reading the Pictures, and I'm a clinical psychologist. We've been off the air for a few weeks, so I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, we had kind of an extended spring break, although neither of us was on the beach, were we, Michael?
No, but we can take that academic license, I guess.
So, yes, yeah.
These three photos this week, it seems like it applies to every week, but are just not just extraordinary, but I think what they do is talk or speak to what you could call it the golden age of visual rhetoric. It seems like spoken language at this point has actually been eclipsed by the storyful or the telling news photo, and especially how powerful portraiture seems to be these days. Every week, there seems to be like 2, 3, 4 really powerful photos that are not just have a lot to say, but capture the public imagination. Pictures that are full of illusions, that have really rendered the 1,000-word maxim to cliche, where today news photos seem to be all of the words. So we have three pictures to talk about this morning, and Cara, so we just jump right in?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. As always, this is a really interesting edit of photos. So here's our first image that we're going to talk about. Michael, why don't you give us the caption?
Okay. Well, Getty Images is always quite prolific with their captions. The photo is taken by one of my favorites, Chip Somodevilla, and the caption reads, "Tears rolled down the face of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School student Emma Gonzalez as she observed 6 minutes and 20 seconds of silence while addressing the March for Our Lives rally on March 24th in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of thousands of demonstrators, including students, teachers, and parents, gathered in Washington for the anti-gun violence rally organized by students of the Douglas High School shooting on February 14th that left 17 dead. More than 800 related events are taking place around the country, or around the world, to call for legislative action to address school safety and gun violence."
One of the things I think is really interesting about this photo is that it's a snapshot in time that's marking an event, Gonzalez's speech, that was actually all about a length of time rather than a moment. And so many of you may recall that what Gonzalez did when she got up to speak was she held on the platform 6 minutes of silence. And this was an incredibly powerful moment. And on the one hand, I'm tempted to say that any photo, even a really fantastic photo like this, can't really fully capture the power of the length of that moment and the way that Gonzalez chose to use her time on stage. Any of you who have stood in front of a group to give a speech, or especially if you're a teacher, we all know how really uncomfortable silence can be, especially when all the attention is focused on you. And Gonzalez did something really powerful. So I'm tempted to say that no picture could really capture the power of this moment. But I think this photo does capture the power of the moment. And it does so because, as the caption itself highlights, it captures Gonzalez's tears. So even though her body is still, and even though her eyes are closed, there's still movement captured in the photo via the tears streaming down her face. And so to me, that is that's the thing that really marks this photo as in its power for me. I don't know what you think about that, Michael.
I agree, and I actually would give the photo even more credit. And of course, you do need to understand what you're looking at. You need to know the context. You have to know that she began her speech, talked for maybe a minute, recited the names of students that died in a very poetic way. And then she stopped and represented the 6 minutes and 20 seconds that it took Nicholas Cruz to commit the massacre in the school. Once you know that, though, and you look at this picture, I think it's stunning and a very, very unusual photo for what it does, both, again, like you were saying, temporally, in terms of how it represents or stands for that amount of time and plugs you into the, you know, the experience of watching her stand there. But it also does something orally, which is, I think, extraordinarily unusual for news photograph. Another photograph I remember was a picture of Michael Brown's father during his son's funeral. And I forget who took it, but you see him in this almost this screech of anguish. And the news photo really conveyed sound. And I think in this photo too, it conveys sound, or even more dramatically, the absence of sound. This is a photo that jumps medium. So what it does is actually convey silence. And you can feel that silence through this solely visual image. And I think that that's astonishing.
You know, and in thinking about that sense of orality, AUR, right? The microphones then become really interesting part of the picture, don't they? Because the microphones it is both her opportunity and more broadly the young people's opportunity to speak out and to have their say. And as her pin says on her jacket, to call BS, right? But at the same time, she's choosing to use that time in this way that would seem to, again, privilege silence over speech. So I hadn't really thought about the component of the microphones as much until you started talking. And I thought, yeah, that is really interesting, because it's a picture of her having a platform and using it in a way that's really unexpected.
And if you take that a little further, and I hadn't seen this either, but there's other cues in the photo that also start to represent and then juxtapose these different modalities. Marching, the word march behind her is, again, this physical act. So, you know, and the buttons are also connote speech and call out. And in fact, we call BS was the phrase that Gonzales herself launched as a key phrase for this movement in that first and very powerful speech that she gave right after the shooting. So you do have other cues in the picture too that contrast and highlight how powerfully silent and expressive she is.
Yeah, and that sense of there's speech apart from the silence, and then the silence itself is a form of speech, right? Kind of both of those things happening at the same time.
And in fact, what's happened to rhetoric in our culture, to go back to the point of how powerful these images are right now, with Trump, we know that, you know, he's not someone who moves people through language, not in a poetic or not in a, you know, eloquent way that we, you know, the way that we understand speech to work. So in a way, it's like these photographs are now, and a photograph like this is leading the way or filling that vacuum.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And maybe that's a good transition to our next photo, which is again also kind of about different modes of spoken and visual confrontation and resistance. Should we move on to that?
Yes. This photo is also another Getty image photo by another one of their really fantastic photographers, Justin Sullivan. And the caption reads, "An attendee holds a cell phone like a gun during a special city council meeting at Sacramento City Hall on March 27th in Sacramento, California. Hundreds packed a special city council." I would edit that caption a little bit. City Hall meeting to address concerns over the shooting death of Stephon Clark by Sacramento police. Just a little bit more context, we know, or if you've been following the news, you know about the horrific incident on March 18th. Stephon Clark was in the backyard of his grandmother's house, and police, two police officers were there, thought he was someone who was in the neighborhood smashing car windows, and he was shot over 20 times, I believe 20 times. The photo specifically records the city council meeting where Stephon Clark's brother Stevante led a protest, and at one point really kind of took over the council meeting. And it's extreme. The image, all the images from, or many images from that event are incredibly powerful. We tweeted about a number of them.
Yeah, people should definitely check those out, because you featured another group of images apart from the one that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
The
one thing I did want to say, and this is what really struck me, and I've commented about this in like I said, in a number of the different venues, is just how incredibly ironic this photo is, to me at least, because on the one hand, this man is play acting the misperception or the stereotype, the perception of police that a black man is more likely to be holding a gun than a cell phone, and that and that young black males are inherently dangerous. And so, on the one hand, this is representing that to us. He's acting that out, but at the same time, you can't look at this photo without also, or I can't, feeling that it demonstrates the menace itself. So this is. And then you see the guy behind him, by the way, and I'm not sure if that man is also doing the same gesture or not, but then it looks like kind of, how it just keeps getting replicated from, the killing to this posture, and then on and on. But I just find the photo incredibly ironic.
Yeah, and my understanding is that this moment with the phones emerged when one of the local Sacramento activists asked people in the room to hold up their phones as a way to say, when you're holding up and using your phone, you don't look like you're holding a gun. And so what I think is really, if you look, the woman holding up what I assume is a cell phone with a red case, she's in the background right below the man's hands. You can see a few people are kind of like, hey, here's my phone, right? And so the kind of multiple ironies then that play out from that. So to me, the posture is really interesting, because for all the reasons you suggested, that it replicates this kind of cultural fear and anxiety on the part of white people. And at the same time, it's also, if in the context of this moment that in the meeting, it's also saying, when I'm walking around holding my phone, am I really holding it like this? Like, is this really how, I use my phone? Is this what it would, is this what he was doing? No, right? He was holding his phone the way anybody else who was using their phone would hold their phone, down in their hand, looking at it, not pointing it like it's a gun. So to me, that gesture, I think, is again, it both replicates the threat, as you say, but then it also just says, okay, like, here's the visual joke. I would never point my phone at you like it's a gun if I were using it as a phone, right? The other thing, two things about initial things about this photo that I think are really interesting. One is the pointing gesture, regardless of what it is, and in this case, it is a phone that triggers our anxieties about it potentially being a gun. That pointing gesture is pointing to something off the screen. So we don't know what is being pointed at. And as an image of confrontation in this moment of where people in the community are saying, look, we're coming to talk to people in power about this problem. We are angry. We need to hear more from you than platitudes. We need to know what you're going to do. That pointing gesture also just kind of says, okay, we're talking to you. We're coming here to interact with you. And the sense that that the object of the pointing, if you will, is off screen, I think also amplifies the sense of, what Sullivan's doing here is prioritizing the voices and the faces and the bodies of the people who are confronting.
It's like a pointed need from the state, or from the the amorphous state. It's interesting.
Yeah. So kind of who's being pointed at. And then the other part too, which I thought was interesting, is think about all the ways that a cell phone can be a weapon, right? Can be a political weapon. Think about the power of the cell phone video that we've seen in these tragic moments of where police have murdered Black citizens, right? So the recorded cell phone video, the power of the circulation of those videos, the live tweeting of events like Ferguson. So in some ways, I don't know the context in which this man chose to do this gesture other than being invited, right, to show your cell phone. But what I think is interesting is part of me also wonders or wants to think of him as saying, my phone is a weapon and I can probably use that too, right? I can use that to amplify my voice in a way that, might be similar to the way that Emma Gonzalez has those microphones at her disposal too.
Yeah. Well, and when you look at the thermal video from the helicopter, and then also the body cam footage, you're absolutely right, because the phone does become actually a conveyance of the act. So it is interesting, the role of the photo, of the phone. There's so many other things, actually, when I started really digging into this photograph. I think that the juxtaposition of the man and the woman, and I doubt that they're related at all, but you do have the role, and maybe that's stereotypical too, the way these shootings in the Black community are depicted. But you've got the mother, the loss of the mothers, and the loss of the young men, and they're juxtaposed here. And then another thing is, if you've been following the story, almost everybody in that room is wearing the same T-shirt, and there's also more irony there, because the T-shirt reads in capital letters the word "build" in purple, period, and then below it in white in capital letters the word "black," build black, and then underneath that it says this is a movement, not a moment. And first of all, build and black is extraordinarily constructive in terms of how we have to learn from these incidents, and also make and be constructive. And if you've been, and again, throughout the story, people have been nothing but constructive. In fact, Stephon Clark, when he some people would see it as kind of commandeering that city council meeting, he had already met with the president of the city council, and they're talking about doing a children's activity center named after his brother. And so and just the whole way that people have gone about protesting this, even though there's so much rage, has been very constructive. But then there's a subtext. There's more language under the language when it says this is a movement, not a moment. Well, to the media, everything's a moment. So in a way, how do you get the sense when you see an image like this, that of the tone and attitude of a larger community, when you see so much protest and you see so much rage? Because in Sacramento, in fact, and you see this also from the basketball owner and the Sacramento Kings, that lost a lot of business because people marched and shut down at least 2 NBA games, that there still is very much an attitude of build black in that community. So, and then one more thing is kind of interesting too. If you look at this man's arms, at least on his left arm, the inside of his left arm, what that is, if you look closely, is the outline of the state of California. And
I wondered about that. Yeah,
I find that also, it's really fascinating too. Are we talking about pride of place? Are we talking about an empty, an outline where, we need to, fill up that space in a constructive way? I mean, it's just really powerful that, it's the arm of the state. And someone who's this disenfranchised and representing, an act of the ultimate disenfranchisement. So I think that's really powerful also.
Yeah. And disenfranchised, but not disempowered, right? So, I mean, one gets the impression, and as you pointed out, the activists are doing a variety of different things. So they're engaged, and one imagines that the activist community in Sacramento didn't just emerge after this moment, right? This is one in a long series of public policy discussions and other kinds of things that surely they've been participating in. And so, so that sense of place, home, local, that's really interesting. Given that we've now shifted, I guess, to talking about the state in one way, maybe that's kind of an odd transition to our last image of the week, which is this cover of Time magazine. Anything you want to say to set this up, Michael?
Just that the photograph was taken by Philip Montgomery for Time, and he is a wonderful documentary photographer. And the title of the article, which in contrast to the anchor text, which really skews the interview that they did with Sessions, the title of the article says, Jeff Sessions is winning for Donald Trump if only he can keep his job. And then I was also going to say that, again, in terms of how powerful news photography is these days, it seemed like the photograph, the cover image, got as much or more attention than the article did. So,
yeah, I've seen a few remixings and appropriations of it already in just a few days. One of the things I thought as I looked over this group of 3 images for this week is that we have a kind of theme of faces and bodies going, and even though this is a very different image and a different context from the other two, in other ways it isn't. And so for me, one of the things I think is important to interpreting this image is to think about the rhetoric of portraiture and what's a portrait supposed to do. And portraits, historically and into contemporary times, tend to kind of be interpreted generally as doing 2 things. One is conferring some sort of status on the person, the subject of the portrait. And then the second is whether it's fair or not or appropriate or not. One of the things we do when we read or take up a portrait is portraits seem to invite us to reflect upon the subject's character. And the portrait artists, portrait photographers know that when they are making an image, they are simultaneously commenting in some way on an interpretation of the character of the subject. So thinking about those 2 things with the Sessions portrait, one of the things I thought was strangely compelling about this image is Sessions is often depicted or described using terms like elfin, right? And he's usually smiling, even in context maybe where a smile might not seem appropriate. And so to me, what was interesting about this portrait is that often I think when we see him in photographs, or when people, especially people who are criticizing him, comment on him, they speak about him in this kind of diminished way. He's this elfin person, etc. But this portrait confers a lot of power on him while still retaining some of those qualities you might say of caricature. I think the distortion of the lighting. This is a really extreme close-up portrait. If you think about the Emma Gonzalez portrait, which again was more of a news photo in that it was not staged for portraiture, it was part of this event. But still, the photographer in that photo really was at a respectful distance in making that portrait of Emma Gonzalez, where here there's an intimacy that kind of borders on a distorted way of presenting Sessions. And I think that's really interesting. He's almost glowing in a way.
Trump's called him Mr. Magoo, and then the way that this pivots off of that I was interested. What you're saying about portraiture is really interesting, and again, it's like really portraiture really is like a really powerful, batter in the whole, realm of news photography right now. But I was interested in this as very much like the politics of the image, and Time magazine, just like let's say Good Morning America, and maybe it has almost like an equal amount of weight in terms of how it can speak to audience of one, and so to Trump, and so people were talking about this being a taunt, just the way that the Bannon and the Kushner covers were supposedly taunting Trump, who does not like, or supposedly does not like, anybody else kind of competing with his oxygen. And
he does have a well-documented love of pictures of himself on the cover of magazines. We know that, right?
Yes, absolutely. And we've documented that at Read the Pictures. But what I don't understand here is where, Time is going, because, they're playing up this nobody's above the law. I mean, most of the article is talking about how consistent Sessions is with Trump and Trump's politics and being very reactionary. Mm-hmm. But then they call out that one quote where he is holding his own and pushing back somewhat on all of the disparagement to Mr. Magoo by saying that nobody's above the law. So that's really, they try to turn this into a pushback on Trump. And so that maybe, I'm still not sure if Trump would actually feel calmer or more vindicated, because the picture makes, as a lot of people said, makes Sessions out to be more like the cover of the box set of the Leprechaun movies or the Crypt Keeper. So I'm not sure. I think maybe in some way this was Time trying to be provocative when it comes to Trump, but like sort of failing on that score. So
yeah, I mean, the tone of that article was, the thesis of the article was Jeff Sessions is actually really loyal, if only Trump would notice. And so, and then the extension of that is, and he's loyal in ways that are like basically before our eyes without most people noticing. He's really dismantling the whole civil rights apparatus, right? So the ways that he's loyal are in fact dangerous. So I don't know. I would disagree. I think this photo. I don't know that this portrait plays off of the Mr. Magoo kind of elfin thing, but I really feel like it confers some more status onto Sessions than those kinds of caricatures. And I think it does it by making him seem more threatening and demonic. I mean, the really heavy side lighting, which creates this kind of shadow along his forehead, and you get this kind of dark line that goes straight down his face, like to his tie. The fact that it is a straight-on portrait, so that it's not him looking off into the distance, being authoritative, but it's again that kind of visual confrontation. So that may reflect your sense of they're trying to pick at Trump.
I think it's a good point.
I think if I were Jeff Sessions, I would actually be weirdly pleased with this portrait, and I'm not sure how I myself feel about that, but I mean, not only because again it does tweak Trump a little bit about his love of magazine covers, but I think it confers a kind of danger to the Mr. Magoo image that maybe we haven't seen before.
I agree. And in fact, just to toot our horn a little bit, we posted a picture, and I think it's in our week in review that we just put on our site also, and did on Twitter. Excuse me, early in the week, David Butow had this wonderful photo, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, we posted it this week, of Sessions in the crowd when Trump was giving that opioid speech in New Hampshire. And it was so and he was going at this so he looked totally more Mr. Magoo-ish than Mr. Magoo. But our take on the photo was, this is really sort of entertaining and disparaging, but at the same time, with Pompeo and Bolton coming in, you can expect that things are going to get a lot darker, a lot faster. And then 4 days later, boom, we get this.
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, you predicted it. You predicted the visual future.
Well, not to take the credit, but it is interesting how it represents that kind of trend, these photos and these photographers do represent, and they sense, and then they depict, this kind of the general tone and atmosphere. And this is really like the pivot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway, more next week.
So we've had an interesting week. Yet again, we've had an interesting week of photos. Do you want to send our viewers off with any wise words, Michael?
Well, I just want to thank people for watching. If you like what we're doing, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We're doing a lot of micro-analysis in both places. Also, you can sign up on our website for our weekly Week in Review newsletter. And then we're trying to do the Chatting the Pics most Saturdays with replays on our website. So, and we welcome your feedback. Absolutely, especially on our Facebook page where we're streaming the live program. So this was fun, and we hope to see you again next week.
Yeah, we'll see you all very soon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a good week.
Take care.